Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video we're going to talk about my meta predictions and overall just what's changing and how different healers are shaping up for Mythic Plus in 9.1. I've been trying to figure out how exactly I wanted to structure a video like this, and I first started with something really scripted, but instead I think I'm going to do something a little bit more freeform. We're going to do almost a little bit of a lightning round format where I give myself 5 minutes, I talk about one specific healer, one specific topic, and we move on. So first I'm going to talk about the general criteria of the video and what I think about healers as a whole, and I'll move on to just fire off one healer down the line. I have here the patch notes with me, as well as the new legendaries that are coming up soon, and a little notepad for me to write some notes. So let's just see how it goes. Let me know what you think of the format in the comments below. Let's get started. So first, a 5-minute intro. We'll see if we can do it. So keep in mind, this is only going to be my guesses. I'm just a cat with a waffle on his head, guys. I don't know what's going on. A lot of people look to me to try and figure out what's coming up in the future, and I'm still figuring it out like you guys, so I'm just, this is just my ideas. Also keep in mind that there's going to be a big tuning pass in Heroic Week. A lot of people think that the patch is set in stone, but very likely after the Heroic Raid gets through, what happens is there's another small tuning pass where they sort of look at how all the classes performed in Heroic Raid, and there will be almost definitely another balance patch. So watch out for that, and don't think everything's set in stone until the Mythic Raid is released, and then it's more likely things are going to stick. Another thing to consider is that in a higher end gameplay, the healer covenant matters. We saw a lot of healers go Venthyr at the start of the season because not a lot of the meta classes play Venthyr. And it turns out that Venthyr was pretty good for a lot of healers like Disc Priest, Holy Paladin, and Resto Shaman, but we may see it different in the next season where healers have to play a covenant that's not necessarily good for them. So keep in mind that we're going to be talking a little bit about the high-end meta as well. And I'm going to try and make this video talk about many different topics, not just the high-end meta. The high-end meta is definitely important, but I understand that different people care about different things. Try and understand from my perspective that a lot of what drives the top meta is how much damage a healer does. Because Mythic Plus is a timed format, and whatever healer is doing the most damage, assuming they can survive, is going to be the quote-unquote best healer that you see in the top keys. But just because that healer does the most damage doesn't mean it's the best for you, it's the best for pugs, or whatever. However, what does happen is that people see 9 of the top 10 healers are Holy Paladin, or, your favorite Disc Priest or your favorite Resto Druid switches to Holy Paladin, and they start to get this impression that Holy Paladin is the best healer. So meta does matter for finding groups, right? I think not everyone super cares about being the #1 meta class and being a meta slave. However, people like being invited, and WoW is a team game. So that's why I do talk about the healer meta and high-end content, but hopefully I'll talk a little bit about how healers feel for you to play, and also just some of their general strengths and weaknesses, and maybe things that might be a little bit different if you played a little bit at the start of Shadowlands and now you're coming back and just want to see how things go. So generally speaking, unless there's a situation where a healer is like the only healer that can survive, for example, let's say you get to at the top level a keystone plus 25, and let's say Mistweaver is the only healer that has enough healing to beat some of the bosses, you'll see the meta gravitate towards a Mistweaver, but generally things aren't tuned that tightly from a healing perspective, and so that isn't the case. Therefore, you don't see the very top healing healers, the most throughput, if you will, end up at the top of the leaderboard, right? What do you see? The ones that have the most damage. Or you may see something that, you need a specific utility. For example, let's say you need to have a Night Fae healer in groups, or a Venthyr healer, or you need to have a Battle Res was a common one in early Mythic Plus. So keep that in mind. So there's 3 things that are going to be the major drivers of what's changing, right? What's new. The first one is balance tuning. We have a big balance patch here. Lots of different changes. Not as much as I would like to see, but there's still definitely a lot of changes. Also, we have new legendaries. Each class/covenant has a new legendary coming with them. Some are good, some are bad. And healers that benefit from those Legos and will see a power increase will benefit. And the third one that I don't have a tab open is the new affix, Tormented. I have a video on Tormented. I'll leave a link to that video in the description if you haven't seen that. but keep in mind that's only mostly speculation. We don't know exactly how that's going to go down. So perfect. Intro under 5 minutes. Let's reset the timer and let's start with Paladin. Paladin is definitely the most popular healer in Shadowlands right now, simply because its damage is so high. If a Paladin can live in a dungeon, it's going to be the best healer by far just because it's speeding things up so much. And one of the big changes is actually pretty heavy damage nerfs from Paladin. You'll see a bunch of different numbers here. For example, all damage reduced by 8%, as well as further nerfs to some of their bigger abilities, Ashen Hollow, Hammer of Wrath, Judgment. Also, you see Crusader Strike mana cost is slightly increased. Crusader's Might, which is a talent, which is basically a talent that everyone takes, is increased. So Paladin's got some nerfs. The question is, how are they going to handle out? Well, I think they're still going to be pretty good. The nerfs end up being about 15 to 17% overall damage, which if you track some of the really high-end keys, Paladins are doing like 40%, 50%, 100% more damage than some of the other healers. So I have a feeling that Paladin are still going to be like the top-end damage healer, if you will. Hopefully it'll be a lot less noticeable. You know, it's not like you're going to save 3 minutes when you have a Holy Paladin now. It's more like maybe you'll save 1 minute. And hopefully that trade-off is worth the risk of bringing a Holy Paladin and being a more DPS-geared style. Another thing to consider is that they're reworking Infusion of Light as well as giving a slight buff to Flash of Light. A lot of people are worried that this is going to turn Paladin into like this caster style or ruin how Paladins are playing. I really don't think that's going to be the case. I think this is a very big quality of life improvement in that in the few situations where you do need a hard cast, let's say it's really dangerous in melee or you just don't have a good button to press, or you know, someone really needs big healing and you can't just hit Crusader Strike and hope that your wall comes back up. I think this is going to make Paladin feel better. So if you're a Paladin and you're worried about needing to change your rotation or anything crazy, when I was playing on PTR, I wasn't doing anything different. I was mainly just doing my normal rotation and playing as is. And when I decide to use, you know, like for instance, you can use your Infusion of Light proc and use Holy Light on the person with Beacon and it generates 2 Holy Power. Which, let's say it's dangerous to go in melee or something's going on and, you know, for whatever reason you can't Crusader Strike, that's a pretty good button to press, right? It throws a nice heal on the tank. It also gives you some Holy Power. So all in all, I think Paladins definitely made it out bad. You know, they got nerfed. However, they're still so strong that I think they'll still be okay. And notice that of all the nerfs, there's not really a big nerf to the healing. It's mainly just the Crusader Strike stuff, which is very minimal when it comes to healing. So it's mainly just a damage side nerf. The Legos, unfortunately, Paladins didn't make it out very well. I might be wrong about this, but in my opinion, all of the Paladin Legos seem very underwhelming. I'm not very interested to try any of these. I'm sure if I'll have the extra Soul Ash, I might make one, but I think for the most part, you're going to stick to what you're using. If you're Venthyr, you're going to play Mad Paragon for damage, or if you're Venthyr or Kyrian or anything else, you'll play Shock Barrier. Shock Barrier is a great defensive HPS logo. And then maybe as an in-between, maybe you might play Relentless Inquisitor. I know we didn't see too many Paladins playing with that, but mostly because everyone's playing Venthyr. We'll also talk about the new affix, Tormented. Also, ultimately, I don't think Paladin is going to change too much there. You know, you get a little bit of haste from the affix, which will be nice. You know, generally the buff that you get from a healer is either mana or haste, among other things. So that's mainly what I'm going to talk about there. There might be a few that are tough to heal as a Paladin. However, because it may only be 1 or 2 of them that are hard to heal, it'll be very similar to Pride, where, you know, you'll know exactly where the hard ones are and you can sort of plan them out. The nice thing about these are you don't have to fight them at each 20% count. They're just, you fight them when you fight them. So as a Paladin, one thing you'll run into is, oh, we accidentally spawned Pride and I don't have any big cooldowns, I can't heal this thing. Whereas with this affix, if you don't have a cooldowns, you can say, hey, let's wait, or, you know, let's do this other pack first, or whatever's going on. You can slightly adjust the route. So in summary, I think Paladin's still very likely going to be in the meta. It may not be as oppressive and dominant as it is now, but because it does so much damage and because everyone plays it now because it was so good, I think it's going to be pretty strong. It's a very high damage output healer, and it definitely fits the like battle medic aesthetic of sitting in melee and healing while doing damage. However, it is important to note that its healing is a little bit weak compared to other healers. Paladin's definitely going to feel a little bit strapped for healing, especially if you don't have any big cooldowns. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's the safe pick. However, you know, if people are healing 25 keys with Paladin, then they'll make it work. All right, so next we talk about Shaman. Shaman, well, either fortunately or unfortunately has, I believe, 0 balance changes. Warrior, Warlock, Rogue. Yeah. 0 balance changes with Shaman. There's like maybe some small stuff, but I don't even see anything. Shaman is basically untouched, which is kind of good, right? Shamans are pretty solid. They're pretty solid healers right now in Raid and in Mythic Plus. And at the beginning of the season, they totally dominated. And then we started to see our Paladin overlords take over. So it's actually, you know, the Shamans ending up with no changes. As much as you like new stuff, they are still making it out pretty well. So let's talk about the Shaman legendaries. So one nice thing that Shamans have coming is their legendaries, I think, are better than their current set. Their set of legendaries aren't very exciting right now. There's essentially some pretty weak healing Legos like Primal Tide or Mana Tide, but you know, you don't really get that much benefit out of those. And then you have a damage Lego like the Earth Alley Earthquake, but it's not very versatile. Some of the new Legos seem pretty good. The two that I'm most excited about, the Venthyr Elemental Conduit. This gives you a Riptide and a Flame Shock every time you use Chain Harvest and you hit something. While this isn't super effective, what I really like about this is its versatility. This is a Lego that it still gives you a little bit of damage. It puts Flame Shock on 5 guys, and so it'll be nice for DPS. However, it's also nice if you need to heal. And that's the problem with all the Shaman Legos currently, is they're either one or the other. And a lot of times in Mythic Plus, situations are diverse, and there's no, you know, this is what you need all the time. So having a Lego that works for healing and damage is something that Shamans definitely need. Another Lego that's very, very popular right now is the Raging Vesper Vortex, or the Kyrian one. I've been seeing screenshots and logs of this doing insane amounts of damage. Personally, this is going to come down purely to tuning. Kyrian Shaman is okay. It's maybe a little behind its counterparts, but not by much. Personally, I don't find Vesper Totem really that fun to play with. However, if the numbers are there, and right now they're there, right now the Vesper Totem with the Legendary is doing absurd amounts of damage. It's doing, you know, 30, even 40% of your overall if you're able to utilize it effectively. However, I'm a little worried that we may see a nerf. You know, I don't think a Legendary doing, you know, a quarter of your overall damage or more is that good. Even the Earthquake Earth Alley Lego, if you pull around it, doesn't do that. So if the Kyrian Lego goes live like this in its current state, I think we will see Shaman switch to Kyrian and play Kyrian in Mythic Plus. However, I'm a little skeptical that it will, just based off of how strongly tuned it is. The other two Legos don't seem too exciting. The Night Fae one is especially bad. The Necrolord one I don't think is great for Shaman either, just because Shaman isn't that bursty of a class. So lastly, let's talk about the affix. I would say the affix overall is pretty reasonable for Shaman. A couple of them might be a little bit hard to heal, but Shaman's a pretty good healer, both with burst single target healing and with sustained party healing. So I think Shamans won't have too much of a time dealing with them. Shamans in Mythic Plus also benefit quite a bit from haste. Not really healing wise, but damage wise especially, making your flame shocks tick faster, just lowering the cast time of your abilities so you can get more globals out. Overall, haste feels pretty good for Shaman in Mythic Plus, and you're going to get a lot of haste from the affix. You don't necessarily need the mana from the mana power guys, so you'll probably just end up taking haste most of the time. Other than that, so in summary, I think Shaman is the safe pick, if you will. It's very possible we see the end game sort of dominated by Paladins like we did in Season 1. However, Shaman is a much more complete package, I would say. It has better healing, both single target and AoE. Its damage is still good. It's not really that far behind Paladin anymore. It also has some good utility that you can get into groups with, you know, Bloodlust, Interrupts. And then also on top of that, it's ranged. You know, a lot of people struggle with Paladin because it's a melee healer. It's not necessarily a complicated rotation, but as a Paladin, you have to stay in melee all the time. And one of the benefits of Shaman is that you don't have to. So that is cover Shaman. That went pretty quick. We'll reset our timer and we'll talk about one that I know a lot of people want to hear. Druid. Druid has, unfortunately, no balance changes. They've slightly nerfed, actually pretty big nerf, to Well-Honed Instincts. But other than that, Resto Druids aren't really getting changed that much. And a lot of people might be a little bit disappointed by that. Resto Druids really fell out of favor in Mythic Plus. They were sort of very popular in BFA all the way up until the very end of the expansion. And then now in Shadowlands, they kind of got overtaken by Paladins and Shamans. And they don't really seem to have a place right now. And there's not really any buffs or anything coming. Let's look at the Legos now. The Legos actually aren't very good either. Looking at Resto Druid, the Kyrian one may be good, but it's very hard to say. Adaptive Swarm, I think, splitting into two doesn't seem that beneficial. And the Convoke Reduce Cooldown sounds like it might be fun, but realistically, I don't think it's going to be that useful. I think you're mainly just going to use the Legos that you were using before. Either Verdant Infusion if you want to do big healing, or Circle of Life and Death if you're trying to do more damage with their dots. The new affix, however, is one thing that's pretty good for Druid because it gives them haste. Druids love haste. Haste is very, very good for Druids, and they don't necessarily have mana problems, so they'll be taking the haste power most of the time, and that's going to make all their abilities feel good. Their dots are going to tick faster, their hots are going to tick faster, they're going to be able to weave in, a lot of hots with keeping up Sunfire and Moonfire, and I think having a high amount of haste from the affix is definitely going to feel good. And you may think at this point that Druid's in trouble. There's no way Druid's going to get good. There's no balance patch. There's no Legos that they're going to use. How is Druid ever going to make a comeback? There are some things that I think you should consider, and I think there actually is more hope for Druid than most people think. Number one is that Boomies got nerfed. I'm not saying that Boomies won't be in the meta or that they're bad or anything, but just keep in mind there's a possibility that Boomies fall out and you don't see Boomies. One of the big downsides to Druid right now is that every single top team has a Boomie, and Druid, it has that amazing utility kit with the good battle res, the Soothe, Vortex, Typhoon, all that stuff, right? And when you have a Boomie, you don't need any of that. Having a Druid healer doesn't add anything really, other than, well, it's a Druid healer. But once Boomie goes away, now all that stuff is going to be looking pretty appealing again. And, when it's Raging Week or you need to soothe the mobs in Theater of Pain or whatever happens to be, if Druid goes away, Druid Healer gains a lot of value. Another thing about Druid is that traditionally it scales pretty well with stats. I don't like to talk about scaling too much because I don't think it's super relevant, but I think it is a little bit important with Druid right now. Druid's power is directly relative to how much haste that you have, especially the way that Druid feels. Maybe not direct power, if you math out the spreadsheets and you calculate the exact healing, but in practice, when you're doing Mythic Plus and you need to do a lot of things, you need to weave in your utility, your damage, your healing, you need to lay your hots, having more haste feels good. And right now it's pretty tough to get a lot of haste. You can get up to 25 or 30% haste with a Druid, but you need pretty dang good gear. You need to be decked out in like full mythic gear at this point with all your sockets and stuff to get up to 30% haste. You really need to. In the next patch, when everyone gets 20, 25 item levels, it's going to be pretty easy to get 30% haste. Maybe not super easy, but every single Druid, even if you're not banging out in gear, is going to feel like, okay, my abilities cast fast, I'm not slow, like I can bang out a couple heals, and that's where Druid really starts to feel good. Also, Druid sort of lacks the, the big heals like Healing Surge or, even just like Holy Shock or Word of Glory or something like that. So that's one thing that as the Druid heals get stronger individually, their Druid will feel like a more complete class. Every Druid knows that feeling of spamming regrowth, you know, 5 times in a row on the same target. That's not what Druid is meant to really feel like. You're kind of meant to put all your hots on them and then maybe 1 regrowth, and then it, you know, hopefully it starts to counteract the damage. You never want to be spamming regrowth. And once the stat numbers start to get higher and the swift mends and the regrowth starts to heal a bigger percentage of somebody's health bar, I think Druid's going to feel better. So in summary, I don't know if Druid's going to just immediately pop back into the meta, but I certainly think that Druid's going to be a solid healer, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the old school, you know, really good Druids start coming back and giving it a try and actually doing pretty well. All right, so now on to Mistweaver. Mistweaver, actually, unlike the other healers... Wait, did I lose my... How did I lose my tab? Okay, sorry, technical difficulties. Of course, when we talk about Mistweavers, we get the technical difficulties. So Mistweaver got actually a pretty sizable DPS increase. Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Rising Sun Kick, Spinning Crane Kick, all increased pretty heavily. You know, they got a nice solid damage buff, and they definitely needed it. Some also small changes. Enveloping Mist is going to cost a little bit less mana. You don't cast that a whole lot, but you still do sometimes. Revival is slightly changed. This is mostly a raid buff. Proccing Gusts of Mist means that when you stack a lot of mastery and you're trying to do big healing, you know, let's say you have mastery procs from like the Kyrian, Weapons of Order or whatever, you know, you can combo that together. But in Mythic Plus, Revival is much less of like a combo big heal and more of like a emergency, you know, top everybody out, or, you know, give everyone healing or maybe remove some stuff. So I don't think this matters too much. The Soothing Mist, no longer interrupted by Mana Tea, will be a nice change. Let's talk about the Covenant Legos as well. I would say the Mistweaver Legos don't look super impactful. Nothing really caught my eye as something that I would use. The Night Fae one, Night Fae Monk has been bugged on PTR the whole time, so no one even really knows how this works. One that I think people are sleeping on, maybe I'm just going to be crazy here, but this might actually be good, is Venthyr Mistweaver. Because nobody plays this, if this is OP, it's never going to get nerfed. But it summons, it makes your Fallen Order stronger, and it also recharges your abilities when you crit. Crit is actually a pretty good stat for Mistweaver, and, you know, it's good for throughput as it is. So scaling off of crit and getting really high crit values and resetting your Fallen Order, maybe this will do a lot of damage or healing or something. I'm not really sure. But the one problem is, or I guess I shouldn't say problem, but Mistweaver's Legos are pretty good. Like, Mistweaver doesn't have the same problem that some other healers have, and that, like, their legendaries, like, mainly Tear of the Morning, and then also Ancient Teachings, and even to some extent, I think the Touch of Death Lego are all pretty good. You know, they do a lot of either damage or healing, so I don't really think Mistweaver has the problem of having bad Legos. The new Affix Tormented, I think, is going to be interesting to talk about. That's because I think the Affix is actually going to be really good for Mistweaver. So there's two things to consider. One, Mistweaver is really, really good at single target healing. And the Affix, I would say, is a little bit of a high demand of single target healing. So seeing, you know, an Affix that puts a big dot on somebody, there's, I think, 2 of the bosses that do that, as well as the Fire guy puts the debuffs on everyone, where Diffuse and Revival are both really strong. Mistweaver, I think, will be the best healer at healing these new lieutenants. And to be honest, I think Mistweaver is probably one of the best healers at healing Pride as well, but it didn't help them that much. The other thing that'll be nice about Mistweaver is the mana. So one of the problems, and a lot of people were worried when Pride goes away, that the mana orbs are going, like, or rather losing the Pride buff is going to make Mistweavers even worse. You're already running out of mana. Losing the Pride, you know, you're just going to run out of mana all the time as Mistweaver. The new Affix, you get more and more consistent mana with the mana orb power. So if you are in a pug and, like, you don't really super, you know, you're not really mega min-maxing the damage, taking the mana orb power every time gives you so much mana as a Mistweaver, and you basically don't run out. We'll see how they tune it. Maybe they nerf it or whatever, but I have a feeling they probably won't. And I think the 1 power will almost completely negate Mistweaver's mana problem, and it'll feel great in pugs. You'll be much less mana starved. One problem that Mistweaver had that a lot of other healers have is that they were really oppressed by HPAL's damage. HPALs are doing like double the damage of Mistweavers realistically now, maybe even more. It's hard to say how that's going to shape up with the Paladin nerfs and the Mistweaver buffs. I have a feeling that Paladin's still probably going to do more. One problem with Mistweaver is that the meta is mostly casters. We're seeing Boomy and Fire Mage and Demon Hunter in the meta. Like if everyone played classes like Hunter, Rogue, Warrior, those physical classes, then I think Mistweaver would be more appealing because you're giving that physical damage buff to everybody. But in a caster meta, you know, you'll traditionally see Mistweavers at lower damage. I still think that Mistweaver's a great healer. I think Mistweaver's pretty good at sustained AoE healing, even though it runs out of mana, and it's definitely good at single target healing as well. In my opinion, Mistweaver it's good. It's good. And I don't think when you play with them, a lot of people don't play Mistweavers and a lot of people don't play with them, but Mistweaver is a very, very safe healer. They have great tank healing. And I'm kind of surprised that so many groups, like Pugs especially, would favor a Holy Paladin over a Mistweaver, because I feel like as a tank, I would feel much safer with a Mistweaver than a Holy Paladin personally, especially like a you know, high IO wannabe guy who's just like pumping damage and not healing at all as a Venthyr Holy Paladin and a Pug. I would much rather have just a Mistweaver that can keep our team alive. All right, now we go on to Priest. Or more specifically, Disc Priest. Disc Priest has no balance changes. They're nerfing Spirit Shell, which isn't really a thing in Mythic Plus. If you're worried about this change in Raid, don't worry. Disc Priest has always been good in Raid all the time. It always has been, it always will. So if you think that your Raid spot is in jeopardy because of Spirit Shell is getting nerfed, I wouldn't worry about that at all. But for Mythic Plus, not really any balance changes. Let's talk about the Legos. For Priest, none of these Legos really stand out to me, except for the Sphere's Harmony. This reduces the cooldown of Boon of Ascended up to a minute reduced. And this is pretty good. Boon of Ascended is a really, really strong cooldown. I think Kyrian Disc Priest for Mythic Plus exclusively is the best Covenant. It's great for AoE damage. It's good for single target damage. It does a ton of healing with Atonement. And reducing this cooldown, it's going to work twofold, because number one, you're reducing the cooldown of Boon of Ascended by 1 minute. And on top of that, you don't have Pride, so you don't have to worry about holding your boon. For me personally, as a disc and keys, I felt like I was always holding my boon for Pride because I was scared I wasn't going to be able to heal it. And Disc Priest now can just lob that boon every time it's up. And if you're using the Soulbind tree, that reduces it even more. You know, you could be sitting on like a minute or an 80-second cooldown boon and just send it every single pack, just lobbing boon and doing pretty good damage. So I think that Mistweaver. Priest Legos are not very good right now. A lot of priests are just running the double power infusion one, which is okay, but not really that good, but they don't have any other options really. And a reduced cooldown on Boon of Ascended, allowing you to get many, many more uses out of it, considering you don't have to hold it for Pride. It's possible that Disc Priest stocks are rising. I'm not 100% sure. It's very hard to say. The hardest thing is that Disc Priest is just so hard to calculate how things are going to happen. You know, you have, first of all, you have PI, which no one even knows how much damage PI gives you in Mythic Plus. It's so variable depending on your group, how it's used, you know, how much you need to use it on yourself. You have a new Lego, so we don't even know how that's going to play out. Also, Paladin was nerfed. You know, we don't know how that's going to shape up. So it's really hard to calculate what Disc Priest is going to look like in the next patch. But I think it'll definitely feel a little bit better than it does now. It'll feel mostly the same. Don't get me wrong. It's not like you're going to be playing Disc Priest and it's, you know, you're going to be doing crazy damage or anything insane. But two things to consider, you know, you have that Kyrian boon that if you're using the Lego will be a shorter cooldown. You also have the mana option that you can take from the seasonal affix Tormented. That's one that I've been talking about for some classes. For Disc Priest, it's great because Disc Priest uses both of those things. Disc Priest can use the haste or it can use the mana. And you can completely pick the situation that you want either of them and cater it to your needs. Let's say you're in a dungeon, you have a hard boss coming up, you're worried about mana, it's tyrannical. Grab that mana power, and it'll be completely night and day how easy it is on your mana on that boss fight. You know, you'll get an extra 50% mana or 60% mana in your pool for that boss. Or let's say it's Grievous, or let's say, you know, your team is chain pulling or your team is monkeys and you need that mana, right? Or, you know, hey, you're slamming and things are going well, grab that haste. Disc Priest loves haste too. Get more buttons in your Boon of Ascended, get more dots out, purge the wicked, keep your atonements up. So Disc Priest really benefits from the new affix, I think. So yeah, more or less Disc Priest will be more of the same. I would say Disc Priest is sort of that healer it's like a riskier Shaman, if you will. Like, you still are at range, you still do okay damage. However, it's squishier a little bit, and it's a bit harder to put all the pieces together and make it work. But when it does work, it feels like you can do really, really crazy things, like giant AoE pulls with PI. You add so much damage there, and just like, you know, cycling cooldowns between like pain suppression on the tank and then rapture and then throwing down a barrier and then a big ramp with atonements on everyone with all your damage buttons. Like, Disc Priest is kind of like not an all or nothing kind of healer, but if things go together, it's actually kind of crazy what you can do, and I would say one of the higher skill cap healers. Will it be meta? Gosh, it's hard to say. I don't know how many Disc Priest players there are. You know, even if Disc Priest is very, very strong, we'll see how many people have priests ready and start going into Mythic Plus. There definitely are some of them, but yeah, who knows? And then last we have Holy Priest. So I don't really talk about Holy Priest that much in my videos, but that's going to change from now on, because this season I actually played a fair amount of Holy Priest. I made it a goal of mine this season to play it and learn how the class works and be able to talk about it at least. So here we are. Balance wise, not much has changed. Symbol of Hope has been redesigned. It basically, you use it, it gives you a little bit more mana than before. Also, or maybe I don't know if it even works for yourself. Maybe it only works for they do. And it recovers their major defensive ability. This is more of a raid thing, sort of like the Spirit Shell change. And let's be honest, in Mythic Plus, you're not going to get very good use out of this. Like, your team is probably monkeys. They're probably not using their defensives enough. In an organized group, it'll be nice, but it won't be that big of a deal. So, more or less, no balance changes. Unlike Kyrian Disc, none of the Legos look very good for Holy. However, part of that is just because Flash Concentration is so good. I think Holies, for the most part, are pretty happy with their Lego selection right now, being able to use Flash Concentration and keys. It gives you really juicy heals, it keeps you more mana efficient, it keeps your brain busy trying to keep your stupid 5 stacks up all the time. So I think Flash Concentration is actually just a strong Lego, and it's going to be hard to replace. Especially considering I feel like most of the legendaries and the Covenant stuff are mostly designed for Shadow and Disc. It kind of like seems like Holy got thrown on the back burner for all this sort of stuff. So I think for the most part, Holy Priest is still going to stick with Flash Concentration. In terms of the new affix, I would say it doesn't really affect Holy Priest that much. Holy Priest doesn't really gain that much from haste, and it also is pretty mana efficient, so it'll be nice to have. It's not like it's going to be... I don't think Holy Priest is going to struggle with the affix per se, especially the healing of it. It'll do a great job healing the affix, but I don't really think it's going to scale that crazy in terms of haste or mana. You know, Holy Priest generally mana efficient anyway, you don't need it. Holy Priest is kind of in an interesting spot. For me, Holy feels a little bit safer and like, I don't know, almost more chill than Disc Priest. Like, Disc Priest, I feel like if I'm on the top of my game and I'm putting everything together, it's gonna do better things. But Holy Priest, it feels like I have much more room for error, and I have much more, like, Disc Priest is really good at keeping everyone's health bars topped, but once all those health bars fall down, then it's like, man, it's really tough for Disc Priest to dig everyone out. Whereas Holy Priest is sort of the opposite. Like, you don't really do that much to keep everyone's health topped. You know, you don't have really hots or big like damage reduction, but what you do have is you have the ultimate whack-a-mole class where you can just top everyone's health up really quick. If you need to, you can pop Apoth, and then you can top everyone's health up even more really quick. And so I think this is something that I say to priests, and maybe people don't really like this. I feel like there's a lot of priests that are just playing one spec. But one of the best things you can do as a priest is be good at both specs. If you play disc, learn a little bit of holy. If you play holy, learn a little bit of disc. Priest is the only class that can actually switch specs to deal with whatever the raid fight or the dungeon is or the affix is. And that's like it's a really good power. Like, it's underrated how much you could benefit your group or your own mental, you know, if it's Grievous and you decide that you just want to play Holy, or maybe it's this one dungeon where it's tons and tons of tank damage and you really feel like you need that pain suppression and that rapture. So it's something to consider, that although it's a little annoying that Holy Priest isn't getting that much, I think even just some of the stuff Disc is getting and being able to switch back and forth, it's sort of what I've been doing on my priest, you know, depending on what I feel like my team needs and what the affixes are, I've been switching in between. So in summary for priests, I think, you know, Holy Priest, again, very similar to Disc Priest in that it's on the squishier side. It's hard to live. You know, it doesn't have that mail armor that Shaman has or the defensives that some of the other healers have. You basically just have Desperate Prayer and Fade, which are pretty underwhelming. So it can be harder to stay alive, but you have more, for your teammates at least, you have more forgiving ability, you know, with GS and with, I don't know if people are still going to use Tuft, but having Tuft as a Holy Priest is actually pretty funny before, so... yeah, that pretty much sums up all my thoughts on the healers. Hopefully, if you are, you know, kind of wondering what to play, or you just want a little update on what's going on with your healer, hopefully this kind of filled you in with my thoughts. You know, as this wasn't really a tier list or anything about, like, you know, which healers are better than what. I know everyone's really excited to know what the 100% guaranteed safe healer of the next meta is, but hopefully this was good information and you enjoyed it, and I will hopefully be working on some guides for 9.1 stuff. I'm kind of hesitant to come in with set in stone guides right away for healers, just because I want to see how all the balance patches and the tuning sort of evolve. So let me know what you guys think, if you would rather have guides right off the bat but maybe has less reliable information, or if you think it's better off to maybe wait a couple weeks and let the patch settle and then have guides there. But, you know, for the few of you that actually made it this far in the video to listen to the outro. So thanks again for watching. I hope you guys are excited for the 9.1 patch, and hopefully you have a good experience healing, and happy keying.